Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar under the title Challenging Nord Stream 2. My name is Reinhard Bütikofer, and I have been organizing this webinar together with my colleagues and friends, Petras Auštrevičius from Lithuania, from the Renew Group, and Gahler from Germany, from the EPP group. We all three belong to the overwhelming majority in the European Parliament that has consistently opposed Nord Stream 2, so we're teaming up also for this discussion today. And I'm very happy that I can present to you and welcome three extremely good experts on the topic that represent different angles of the conversation. Let me start with our Polish guest, the Senior Fellow on Energy Policy and Coordinator of the OSW's Research on Europe's Gas Markets and Policies, Agata Łoskot-Strachota. Welcome. Then we have from the Naftogaz group from Ukraine, the CEO, Dr. Yuri Vitrenko. Welcome very much, sir. And finally, but not least, we have the Managing Director of Environmental Action Germany, Deutsche Umwelthilfe, who are also have been involved with the issue, also in the German courts, trying to block Nord Stream 2. Dr. Sasha Müller-Kraenner. Welcome, Sasha. We have divided up the responsibilities between Petras, Michael, and myself. Petras will manage the discussion, and Michael will draw conclusions at the end. So my task will be over in a minute. My task is just to introduce and welcome. Let me make one remark because of actuality. We learned yesterday that the regional government of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, which is run by a coalition between the socialists and the left, has made use of the so-called Environment Foundation that they founded with Gazprom money to buy a ship that is now helping Gazprom to do the final work on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I think that's a complete breach with public trust, a complete breach with public responsibility, because basically that is putting the government of a German federal state at the service of a Russian corporation. I think that is really highly questionable, and I wanted to make this remark at the beginning because I wouldn't have imagined something like that to happen. But we'll see how it all will work out. And now I would like to ask Petras Auštrevičius to take over, please.
Thank you, Reinhard. Good morning to everybody. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I wish to thank Reinhard Bütikofer, my great colleague in the European Parliament as a Green politician, for initiating this debate. Well, we know and we hear about Nord Stream 1 and finally 2 already for many, many years. I have to admit, it becomes more and more dividing issue within the European Union, as well as on the transatlantic space of politics. I have to admit what Reinhard mentioned to you on these new developments. I want to quote a new development on the US side, as from Monday. We have received some news that the State Department is going to introduce new sanctions on the company so-called Transadria Ltd. and the ship which is involved in the construction of the Nord Stream 2, Merlin. So those two entities will be added to the list of sanctioned physical and judicial entities, and there are 8 of them and 17 ships all in all. So it remains a very political issue, and we know why. We know how much the geopolitics are influenced by this so-called energy project connecting Russia and Germany. So that's why today we have an excellent opportunity once again to touch upon all those most current issues. And I have to admit, we have absolutely excellent group of panelists whom been introduced by Reinhard. And I will start probably from the first one, Ms. Agata Łoskot-Strachota. She is a senior fellow at the Center for European Studies, a very well-known institution and well-respected institution. And she is focusing on energy policy. I will ask each and every of those 3 panelists probably to make concise statements up to 5 minutes in order to give more space and time for a Q&A session. And I believe we will have enough of interesting questions and comments from the audience. Agata, floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you a lot for inviting me here and for possibility of speaking about such a topical issue. So right now we are at the very important moment. Application of the EU law to Nord Stream 2 pipeline has started. German regulator is responsible for that. And as the certification process has just been suspended, it is perhaps a good moment to step back and carefully rethink the process. And I want to make 2 points here. First is that EU law amended gas directive must fully be applied to Nord Stream 2, which means inter alia that it should be full ownership unbundling applied, as the pipeline was not completed prior to 23rd of May 2019. That is the date of entering into force the amended gas directive, which means that neither Nord Stream 2 AG nor its daughter company should be granted the status of independent transmission operator. Actual independence of the pipeline operator from Nord Stream 2 AG and from Gazprom, which is owner of Nord Stream 2 AG, should be guaranteed, as well as application of third-party access rule and setting transparent, non-discriminatory and cost-reflective tariffs in the case of the pipeline. It should also be considered with the new entity just now designated to apply for status of operator, if new certification process should not be launched, including new careful analysis of impact of granting operator status to Nord Stream 2 AG daughter company, the impact on security of supply of Germany, but also of its neighbors and the EU. And such analysis should carefully take into account and weigh comments received from all parties involved. So a diligent certification process is needed, where Bundesnetzagentur has a key role to play, but also European Commission has a role to play, which is, it is expected to issue its opinion on that. Second point is that right now Nord Stream 2 reappears in discussions related to ongoing crisis and unprecedented high prices on the gas markets. And it is worth noting that from August or September, we witnessed lowered gas flows from Russia to Europe, which are getting lower each month. And recently, there are record low bookings of capacities in existing pipelines. In November, flows via Yamal Europe pipeline decreased for several days to 0. And also for December, there are right now 0 bookings for Yamal Europe gas pipeline. Gazprom also is de facto stopped selling gas via exchanges. And we also see record low level of gas in EU storage facilities linked to Gazprom, including very big facilities, European facilities like Reden in Germany. Despite political statements from Russian politicians, situation with Russian flows and storage does not change substantially. Currently, flows are 30% lower than those in November last year and over 40% lower than those in November 2019. Storage sites of these facilities linked to Gazprom are filled only in 30%, and it's winter time coming. And all that happens despite huge demand in Europe, available abundant capacities in existing pipelines, and Russia's statements that it intends to stabilize the situation in the market. And it happens parallelly to Russian claims that it could start flowing extra gas any day if new infrastructure, meaning Nord Stream 2, gets started. That confirms International Energy Agency's estimate that Russia is able to supply extra volumes to European Union. And that fuels uncertainty, impacts situation on the EU gas market and effects in rising gas prices. And it suggests Russia uses current tight market situation and Gazprom's market power to influence EU market situation. And as multiple political statements suggest, lobby for swift launch of Nord Stream 2. And this is exactly why full ownership unbundling, granting separation of interests of gas suppliers and gas infrastructure owners was invented and is needed in the case of Nord Stream 2 to prevent in the future actions by a supplier which favor or discriminate specific transmission routes. Nord Stream 2 launch will increase room of maneuver for Gazprom on EU gas market for influencing prices, stability of supply, routes of supply. And it is even more important as Gazprom remains a dominant supplier to the EU. And current situation shows that Nord Stream 2 will result in redirecting flows and limiting the number of supply routes to the European Union. And so it would decrease European Union's security of supply. So I hope it was 5 minutes. Thank you. And look for questions.
Agata, thank you very much. I mean, you really fit very well time-wise, not to speak about the content. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move to Dr. Sasha Müller-Kraenner, who is one of the founders and a partner of Ecological Institute in Berlin. Dr. Müller-Kraenner has long-standing good experience in German, European, and international environmental policy. Dr. Müller-Kraenner, we are looking for your statement. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and the kind introduction. I'm also speaking now as the CEO of Deutsche Umwelthilfe Environmental Action Germany, environmental NGO in Germany. It was already mentioned that the Nord Stream 2 project is a challenge from a EU energy market perspective. It does not comply with the rules of the European energy market. It's a foreign and security problem. It's a problem for European integration, but it's also a problem for the EU's climate policy objectives. And that is for two reasons. The one is this pipeline is the largest fossil energy project we currently have in Europe. Well, if entering into operation, it would be capable of transporting the equivalent of 100 million tons of CO2 to the European market. That is already today 13% of CO2 emissions in Germany. In 2030, it would be 20%. This is clearly incompatible with the decarbonization strategy. And secondly, also in addition to the CO2 emissions, we have the methane emissions, a very potent greenhouse gas from the gas drilling operations in the Russian Arctic and from gas transport. There we don't have reliable data. We have data that have been given to the licensing authorities by Gazprom, and those are obviously not independent data, but we can extrapolate from satellite data and from comparable US data. And this would make, when we believe those extrapolations, this would make Nord Stream worse than the lignite power plant that is supposed to replace in the European market from a climate perspective. And this, in our view, is a legal problem, and it's a political problem, and it needs legal responses, political responses. We have legally responded by suing the licensing authorities in German courts. We just had court negotiations last week in Greifswald, in the state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern that Reinhard Bütikofer already mentioned. And we were challenging the project based on the Paris Climate Agreement, based on the climate change ruling of the German Constitutional Court, based on the EU's precautionary principle, because we don't know how large the methane emissions are, therefore precaution, and based on the German government's federal climate law, and have said it's not compatible with this legal framework. And an interesting thing happened is our case was rejected in the first instance, but the court also said that we have the right to take a legal look at the emissions that are happening outside of German and European territory in Russia. So this is a very interesting legal ruling. And it also says that in the future, when we look at large infrastructure projects like that, that extraterritorial environmental effects have to be taken into account. We will now take that one level up to the federal administrative court and see what happens. So this is the legal avenue, and we are also challenging the project on a number of other grounds, and with a view of either preventing it or postponing it, or at least scaling it down. And that gets me to the political side of things. As you know, we are currently in the last hours of negotiations, actually in the last hour of negotiations for a German, new German government and a coalition platform. And one challenge the new government has to address, that we have a strategy on gas. That is a gap that we have on the European level, but also on the German level, is that gas plays an increasing role in our energy systems, but we don't have a comprehensive strategy, a strategy that is compatible with the climate targets that we've all set ourselves. It's kind of absurd that we have a climate strategy that is very clear on the European level. We have decarbonization targets, we have Fit for 55, but for one of the large parts of the challenge, the gas sector, we don't have a strategic framework. And this is something that has to happen with the gas package, with the methane package, and in the coming years. And our climate strategy and our strategy on gas has to be compatible. What we believe we will get in the German context is a decarbonization target for the gas sector in electricity production until 2040, and for the economy as a whole until 2045. And what that means is that even if Nord Stream goes into operation, it will only run for another 18 years, because after that we will not burn gas to produce electricity in Germany anymore. This is, by the way, also a question that investors should ask themselves and the people who invest in those companies. Lastly, one thing that I hope the new incoming German government will tackle, besides obviously a more comprehensive and ambitious climate strategy, is that this government will start to repair relations with our neighbors, with our European neighbors, whether it's Poland, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's others, and will rebuild the energy collaboration that we have with our neighbors around renewable electricity and hydrogen, as opposed to the energies of the 20th century. And I agree with what Agata said, the stop in the certification process should all give us pause to reflect a little bit more deeply whether this project makes sense in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Müller. And now I turn to our third speaker, who is Dr. Yuri Vitrenko. He is a CEO of Naftogaz Group of Ukraine. Dr. Vitrenko was deeply involved in reforming this major energy group still owned by state in Ukraine. And I believe he has a good experience on what kind of impact Nord Stream 2 might make on Ukraine's energy situation, not to mention geopolitical one. Dr. Vitrenko, floor is yours. 5 minutes, please.
Petras, thank you very much. I'm also thankful for to highly esteemed members of the European Parliament for this initiative to have this webinar on Nord Stream 2 and in general for your efforts to fight this geopolitical project of Kremlin. And I think it's very important and very timely that the European Parliament is discussing this particular issue. Because the European Parliament made this decision to apply the European rules to Nord Stream 2. It was a very specific, very explicit decision. And now it's obvious that Gazprom is not going to play by these rules. And they are doing everything possible to avoid the application of the third energy package of the relevant European rules to this particular project. And since it was a very clear political will of the European Union that Nord Stream 2, even unlike Nord Stream 1, should be subject to the full set of European rules, this is gas directive, it's very important to show to everybody that Gazprom and Kremlin will not be allowed just to ignore the law in Europe and to be above the law. Very briefly about Naftogaz, yes, we are the national company in Ukraine. We are producing oil and gas. We're also leading the energy transition inside Ukraine, including renewables, hydrogen, biogas, and we're fighting this de facto geopolitical war on the energy front against Gazprom. We had one of the biggest arbitration, the biggest arbitration in the world against Gazprom. The way they were trying to suffocate Ukraine by cutting gas supplies to Ukraine. That's why we had to arrange gas flows from the European market. And that gave us a very valuable experience in the European market. So we know not just a lot about the use of gas as a geopolitical weapon against Ukraine, as we see at the moment, and we have been seeing it for years. But we also see very clearly how Gazprom abuses their dominance in the European market to the detriment of European consumers. And that is why we requested participation in the certification process in Germany. And the German regulator, Bundesnetzagentur, Netza, accepted our request and they admitted us to take a part in this certification process. It does not mean that we have say basically a veto power or something like that, but at least we will be heard. That's at least our hope. And we will provide enough evidence to show that Nord Stream 2 is not compliant with European rules. And that is why the operator of this pipeline cannot be certified, because it will be really a mockery of these rules, especially with the latest trick that Gazprom is trying to play. When they say that they will certify only de facto the last mile, only a small part of this pipeline that is on the German territory. And it's against the intention of the European Parliament, because when the European Parliament decided to apply the European rules to the pipeline, it meant, it's obvious, the whole pipeline. Because the last mile that was on the German territory could be already subject to the third energy package to European rules, even without this decision of the European Parliament. Because the extension of Nord Stream 1, for example, OPAL, that is on the German territory, was subject to European rules. So there was no need for the European Parliament to make this decision if the European Parliament did not want specifically to apply the European rules to the whole pipeline from Russia to Germany. And now when Gazprom is trying to certify only the last mile, again, they're making mockery of this decision of the Parliament, of the European Parliament as a very important European institution. That's why it cannot be allowed. Hopefully, I will be able to take more questions during the Q&A session, but I just want to underline that, again, Nord Stream 2 is not compliant with European rules. We, as a an experienced player in this market, can provide all the necessary evidence to those who wants to hear basically these evidences. And that is why we believe that this project cannot be allowed to become operational. It will be really to the detriment of the European consumers, to the European market, to the security situation in the whole region. And last but not least, I would like to stress that for us it's not an economic question, it's a security question for Ukraine. Because Nord Stream 2 imposes a risk of a full-scale war in Ukraine, that of course something that we want to avoid. And that is why we are that concerned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I thank you all complying with the time limits and for your great statements. Before we go on the Q&A session towards questions presented by the audience or participants of this session, may I ask 3 short questions each of you? May I start from Dr. Vitrenko? Recently, there have been some supply breakups from Russia to Ukraine. Mr. Vitrenko, could you be more specific, briefing us on the present situation with the gas supply to Ukraine? And secondly, Germany has extended invitation for Ukraine to join this certification process. I mean, what does it mean? What kind of role and what are the expectations of the Ukrainian side? Thank you.
The first question, we're not buying from Russia. We're buying gas only from the European market. And currently, we managed to secure volumes in our underground gas storage that together with our local production can cover needs of the Ukrainian consumers, especially vulnerable consumers. At the same time, currently the risk is that Russia is blocking coal supplies to Ukraine. And unfortunately, Ukraine still depends on coal, although we're phasing out coal. And that creates a deficit for our electricity generating companies. And if they start using gas as a source of energy, then it will worsen the situation with gas supplies to Ukraine, because it's all connected to the modern world. The second question about the certification process, again, Bundesnetzagentur, the regulator in Germany, allowed us to participate, but it means that we will have some access to the documents supplied by Gazprom and their affiliates in Germany, and we will be able to provide our counter arguments. It's basically a right to be heard. It's nothing more.
Thank you. Now I have a question, a short question to Dr. Sasha Mueller-Kraenner. Dr. Kraenner, may I ask you the question concerning, as you said, in the new German government program, there is a bigger role dedicated for gas in the energy policy. I mean, to what extent this Nord Stream 2 is seen as a major supply chain or pipeline to satisfy the needs of German transitional periods what comes to decarbonization? Will it be enough, I mean, of Nord Stream 2, or some new pipelines should be used, I mean, to fill this gap? Because I understood that Germany is quite favorable in concerning the taxonomy, considering gas as a kind of transitional fuel for going to Fit 55. And my second question, you mentioned about extraterritorial effects, meaning methane leakage in Russia. Do you have more assessment? What is the situation on the Russian side, and to what extent those assessments are real, blaming Russia for negligence towards stopping that leakage of methane on the Russian territories, especially taking into account many outdated pipelines in the Russian Federation?
Well, on the first question, I obviously do not know the final government platform yet, but let me just make an informed guess. three things. The first one is Germany will accelerate the phase out of coal. It will increase the buildup of renewables, and there will be additional gas capacity needed, in particular to cover the peaks in consumption for an interim period of time. However, this construction of new gas turbines will be licensed in a way that they have to be hydrogen ready, and that they will be licensed for a limited period of time, so that this all is compatible with gas phase out. That leads to the second question on whether investments that have to be paid down over decades, well, are still economic if
I think we lost connection with Dr. Mueller. Yes, connection is lost. I hope, Dr. Mueller will be back in a minute. So before he comes back, may I turn to Agata Łoskot-Strachota and ask her a question. Gazprom is a very big energy player, not just in Russia, but especially in Europe and worldwide. Did you notice any change in Gazprom strategy? What comes to the influencing geopolitics in Europe, and to what extent the Russian government increasingly plays on the Gazprom side, influencing and making any lobbying activities in the European Union countries? What your experience tells about this, Agata?
Well, so what we see clearly recently is the change of behavior of Gazprom in Europe. Well, even as a commercial entity, not only geopolitical one or foreign policy. What Gazprom does with flows to Europe, with storage filling, which is very low, etc., is strikingly different than what it did a year ago or 2 years ago. So that's the first point. And it is different than other suppliers to Europe. So it raises questions what kind of agenda it is fueled by this change of behavior. The second thing that we observe recently are these problems of Moldova. Well, this is not really European Union, but a European country, a small country which uses very little amounts of gas and which has huge problems with supplies despite the fact that capacities in Ukraine are actually available, etc. And it also shows that, the goals behind that are far bigger than just, market players' goals, which are related to pro-European course of new government of Moldova, etc., etc. So that is what we've been seeing in recent weeks and months. I don't know if it answers your questions correctly.
Yes, it does, Agata. Thank you. Dr. Mueller is back. Dr. Mueller, you can continue because you've been
yes.
Interrupted in between.
Yes, there were seemingly internet connection problems. I apologize. On the role of Nord Stream and on the taxonomy, there are different views within the incoming government. In particular, Social Democrats are very much interlinked with the gas industry, so not much support there. I assume that at least from the foreign and economic ministries, and those are the two ministries in charge, there will be a more critical view towards the project. On methane emissions in Russia, so we have increasingly better data from satellite data, from overflights data, and at some point, the databases on which the permissions for Nord Stream 2 and the environmental impact assessment for Nord Stream 2 were granted have to be revised. And that's what we have been arguing. We should do it before the pipeline starts to operate rather than later. because that would put the climate balance of the whole project into doubt.
Thank you. Thank you for a very concrete reply. I know that we have received some questions online. Catherine, may I ask you, to read those questions, and then we will ask our panelists, to reply.
Of course, I can do that. So the first question that we see is, and you can see it in the chat as well, is from Mr. Weingärtner, and he asks, good morning, is there any indication that regulation authorities will exempt Nord Stream 2 from interior market rules when it will be licensed? If Nord Stream 2 would be licensed, is there any reason to believe that this would result in a further reduction of deliveries from Gazprom? So this is not addressed to a particular panelist, but I'll leave it to you.
Okay. Right. Who can to reply to this question? Maybe Dr. Mueller? Do you see any signs of the exemption policy line from the EU side?
I don't have an answer to that question.
So I could try.
Okay, Agata, go forward.
Yes. So first, I don't think Nord Stream 2 could be exempted because it hasn't been completed before an amended gas directive entered into force. So legally it should not be exempted, but there are question marks related how the implementation of EU law will be done in the case of Nord Stream. And there are these question marks that Mr. Vitrenko was raising about if it does not, if it's applied only to this small fraction of Nord Stream 2 in German waters, how could this implementation be effective, this application? How could third-party access be ensured, or transparent tariffs which reflect actual costs? How could a linear pipeline be actually divided formally into two? And so this is the question that I ask myself. And then about reductions. So what we see right now on the market is, in my opinion, of temporary nature, this reduction, because, well, Gazprom's goal is to keep or increase its share in the European market. And it's doing what it's doing because Nord Stream 2 is on site and because it wants to enable bigger flows via new pipelines. So I understand that when Nord Stream 2 is completed, the flows will be actually redirected either from Yamal Europe, firstly from Yamal Europe, because there is no transit contract, but when Ukrainian contract expires, also flows could be redirected from Ukrainian pipeline. So I don't know if it answers your question.
Can I also add to this?
Yes, Yuri.
I would add that on one hand, that it seems like Bundesnetzagentur, the regulator, is going to insist that it should be certified and it should not be exempted. At the same time, substance over form. If Gazprom is successful with this trip, it will mean that Nord Stream 2 will be de facto exempted from the third energy package, from the internal market rules. Because de facto, it will be under the same situation as Nord Stream 1, that is not basically subject to internal market rules. Because, as I mentioned, with Nord Stream 1, that is not subject to the European rules. The extension of this pipeline on the German territory, OPAL, is subject to these rules. But the European legislators were very clear to say that they want a different situation with Nord Stream 2, and they want the whole pipeline to be subject basically to European rules. And in terms of deliveries, it's also very important to recognize that Gazprom and Putin, on top of their very clear desire that Nord Stream 2 should be not subject to European rules, they also even publicly express their position that Europe should go back to long-term contracts with Russia for some huge volumes of gas, because they want to keep this dependence of Europe on Russian gas supplies for decades to come. They don't like this energy transition. They don't like this fight with climate change because of methane emissions or CO2 emissions. They want Europe to commit to buy huge volumes of gas in the next 20, 30, 50 years. And they're public about that. Mr. Putin is saying that, look, you have to sign, if you want more gas, you have to allow Nord Stream 2 to be operating, and you have to sign long-term contracts with Gazprom.
Thank you. Catherine, can we have this second question, please? Or even two?
Yes, if you allow, I will ask the three questions from America Hernandez from Politico, who says, is there a concern in the Bundesnetzagentur that the Altmaier ministry already issued a binding opinion that Nord Stream 2 poses no security of supply threats just 6 days after receiving country submissions? Can the new coalition change this? Next question, the third-party certifier of the pipeline is the elephant in the room. US State Department is not reporting this company for sanctions as required, and Danish Energy Agency has accepted certificates of technical compliance while refusing to release the name of the preparing company. What is being done on this front? And last question, some parties say the US-German deal for $1 billion green fund in Ukraine is a conflict of interest, since Germany's connection to the gas flows via Nord Stream 2 gives it a disincentive to secure gas transit for Ukraine. Thoughts?
Thank you. Politico usually, asks very good questions. We have three questions from Politico. I ask our panelists who want to start with. Maybe Dr. Mueller?
Yes, maybe about the question of the Bundesnetzagentur. Yes, the economic ministry gave its opinion, but I think the new government can amend the opinion if the new government decides to. There are a number of reasons for that. The first one obviously is that not all parties were heard, that the process only took 6 days, and the Bundesnetzagentur in principle is an independent body, but I think if the economic ministry amends its opinion, that opinion will be heard and taken into account, in particular because now the certification process has been stopped anyway. So this is one of the political levers that the new government could use, and I would encourage others from other member states to speak with the new leadership and suggest to them to take that step. By the way, in the case of a decision that Bundesnetzagentur might take, that decision will be an administrative act, and other interested parties can also litigate against such an administrative act. Those could be the net agencies, for example, of a member state like Poland.
Thank you, Dr. Mueller. May I invite Agata probably to tackle especially first and third part of the question, and Yuri Vitrenko to follow.
You mean the question about
security implications?
Okay.
And US-German deal, a kind of conflict of interest concerning Ukraine.
Well, actually, there is a clear conflict of interest as German goal, well, actually, as presented until recently, was to have Nord Stream 2 open and available to Gazprom at full capacity, which means it would mean redirecting of gas flows from Ukraine. This deal also is about enhancing green development in Ukraine and developing green hydrogen sector, etc., which probably is a good direction for future, but it has to be remembered that it won't substitute in short term the incomes from gas transit for Ukraine, and also the ability to buy gas to, I don't know, heat houses in winter time. So I would stop here.
Thank you, Agata. Dr. Vitrenko, would you like to come in?
Yes, first of all, I would not call it a deal because it's to some extent like a promise, and there is no reality behind it. So there is no $1 billion for a green fund in Ukraine. But what is a real threat is that Ukraine is currently, for the last couple of years at least, spending about $2 billion each year in subsidies to renewables. So it's a fact, basically. So we are even exceeding our plans in terms of developing solar and wind generation here in Ukraine. And we have a so-called green tariff, and the government from the state budget basically is subsidizing every year for $2 billion the development of renewables. And that's the same $2 billion that we're getting from transit, basically, as transit fees. So if there is no transit through Ukraine, and that's a consequence of Nord Stream 2, a practical question is, okay, where will we get money to spend on renewables, on this energy transition? And yes, there is a conflict of interest also from a perspective that it puts Germany maybe and some industrial buyers of Russian gas into a more advantageous position vis-a-vis other European markets like Poland, Slovakia, Czechia, and other markets. But I believe that the European Union is based on this solidarity principle. And recently there was a decision of the European Court of Justice that confirmed that the German regulator should apply this principle of energy solidarity. That is in the Article 122 of the treaty founding the European Union. So basically that's the law that the European law that should be also followed. And that a German regulator, when they make their decision, they should look not only at benefits for the Germany, but they should also consider the detrimental effect such project would have on other markets inside the EU.
Thank you. I understood that Michael Gahler wants to come in with his question or comment. Michael, you're welcome.
Briefly, first of all, I think it has been very clear in the whole certification process that the Bundesnetzagentur considers the applicability of the reformed gas directive as the principle that should be applied. So the new rules apply. And I think also the wording of the new directive clearly says a pipeline leading into the EU. Yeah, and that means it's the pipeline as such and not only a short part that is on one or the other's territory. And I think the pipeline is also at least in the exclusive economic zone of other member states like Denmark and probably others as well. So that is the assumption. Next assumption, Nord Stream tried in a separate court case to be exempted, and the latest decision was some months ago from Düsseldorf court, Oberlandesgericht, so a higher court already, saying, no, you're not right, you cannot be exempted. Then the third point is, every decision of the Bundesnetzagentur has also to be presented and approved to the European Commission. So it's not the final decision from Bundesnetzagentur, but that has to be double-checked also from the European Commission. My question, because I'm not an expert in this regard, when it comes to the practical unbundling, so to separate the ownership of the pipeline and the gas, what requirements technically are there to be filled? I mean, could Gazprom sell it to Rosneft or another Russian monopolist or a state-run or even private Russian company? Would that fulfill the requirements of unbundling, or which practical things have to be fulfilled in this regard? That is a question from my side.
Thank you, Michael. Panelists who want to reply to Michael's question on those new requirements?
I would just, because we have this practical experience of unbundling, so Naftogaz was a vertically integrated undertaking, and we also controlled the gas transmission, but we had to unbundle, and we unbundled it. So we're now not in control of the gas transmission. And by the way, our international stakeholders insisted at that time that it had to be full ownership of unbundling. That's what we did. So we had to sell basically to a new owner the pipeline. And it's clear that any subsidiary of Gazprom that would operate this pipeline would be under control of Gazprom and Mr. Putin personally, no matter what kind of Chinese walls or compliance officers are in between of Gazprom and this entity. So again, everybody who is in this industry understands how Russia controls such strategically important assets that they own. That is why the only possible option that would be compliant with European regulation would be a completely new owner of this pipeline. And this owner should be transparent and easy to understand. So it can be like, I don't know, a consortium of some European, for example, transmission system operators or something like that. But for them to become real owners of such pipeline, they should see that other companies can access this pipeline. So Gazprom is not the only monopoly user of such network. So it means that de facto monopoly for pipeline exports of gas in Russia should be broken, so that other producers of gas in Russia should be able to export gas to the European Union. And there are international companies, by the way, producing gas in Russia. It's not only Gazprom. They're really big producers. Also, gas from Central Asia can and should flow through Russia to the European market, basically. And that's a huge source of additional gas to the European market that, by the way, can solve the problem with record high prices at the moment. Russia is de facto blocking these exports from Central Asia, from countries like Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. And by the way, the shortest route for such gas, it's also through Ukraine. So it's from these countries, then through Russia, then through Ukraine to the European Union. So combined, it means that Nord Stream 2 can only be certified if basically there is a completely new owner. As I said, for example, a consortium of European transmission system operators. If export monopoly of Gazprom is broken down, if Russia stops blocking exports and flows from Central Asia, basically meaning that Russia starts playing by the rules when, if it wants to operate inside the European Union, to own assets inside the European Union, to be allowed as a participant of the European market. It's that clear and that simple.
Thank you, Yuri. Thank you for a very important strategic contribution you just made. Catherine, do we have more questions which we didn't reply, I mean, in our Q&A session? Because time is running out and we have to be very quick.
There are still some questions that I can read all at once, and then Please. Maybe the panelists can take them up in their final statements. One question was addressed to Agata. Can you elaborate on how Gazprom has changed strategy in the last years? From Anton H. There is a question from Dame Fras. Two questions to Mr. Bütikofer. What is the position of the new German government regarding Nord Stream 2? And would you care to elaborate a little more on the involvement of Umweltstiftung Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in Nord Stream 2? And David Thomas asks, given the key role of gas as a transition fuel for the EU, what alternative gas supply can the EU now tap to bring prices down? What's a realistic time frame now for Nord Stream 2 certification? And another question that you can also see in the chat from Helga Schmid. What would you recommend, Mr. Bütikofer, to the future German minister responsible for climate and economy when it comes to Nord Stream 2? And as far as taxation is concerned, will there be any change compared to Mrs. Merkel's position?
Thank you. So we got an excellent set of new questions. May I start from Agata, and Reinhard will join, I hope, this Q&A session as well. Agata, may I start from you speaking about this Gazprom strategy change? You touched upon, but once again, I mean,
yes,
shortly and
of
finally.
course. So what we see in recent months is a change from what Gazprom used to do in recent years. That is, it is not filling sufficiently, well, actually in minimal volumes, its own storage facilities in Europe. It is flowing much less gas to Europe than it used to, and on more volatile basis. And then it is limiting the supplies right now in autumn to long-term contracts. It is not selling gas on short-term market, and all that influences, of course, European market. So I hope it answers your question. I would also try to answer this part of Mr. Thomas' question. So first of all, we have different routes of supply for Russian gas already available. So it's not only a question of seeking for new gas, but also of using all routes that we have. And when it comes to time frame for certification, well, it depends on the decision of Bundesnetzagentur, if it fits into current timing for the procedure. But if it fits, it has 2 months. Then European Commission has up to 4 months for issuing opinion, and then Bundesnetzagentur again has 2 months. So it's minimum, well, about 8 months. But of course, it can be shortened or prolonged if something goes wrong. And I would stop here and pass the floor to others.
Thank you. Sasha, would you come in on those questions and your final statement?
Well, as I said before, one of the critical things, because some of the questions were directed, what can the next German government do? One of the critical things would be to recognize that this is not an economic private business project purely, but that this is a political project. And therefore, well, it has to be evaluated in the light of the current political situation and in the context of the effect that this project has on the EU's energy policies, on the EU's climate policy, and on the EU's foreign policy, on the relation with its neighbors. So this is number one. Obviously, we have a project that has almost all the legal permits it needs. Therefore, the role the political space can play is limited. But what can be done is first, well, to take away the public support it has so far enjoyed. And the second thing is that the project has to be embedded in a broader strategic energy and climate policy framework. And so even if we do not prevent it going into operation, it will limit its lifetime.
Thank you. Thank you, Sasha. And Yuri, your final remarks before we go for Reinhard and Michael.
I was on mute. Even based on this discussion, I see that many people in Europe, especially again our esteemed members of the European Parliament and also experts in this particular area, recognize the threats coming from the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and the threats from allowing this pipeline to be above the law in Europe. That is why I believe that we have this shared purpose to fight such illegal and dangerous projects, because we all need the European Union to be, first of all, an example of the rule of law, but also a leader, a global leader in energy transition, meaning a fair and environmentally sustainable energy sectors throughout the world. And by talking to you, I'm now hopeful that, again, we have very strong allies on this front.
Thank you, Yuri. Reinhard, you got some questions as well. I mean, can you be brief in replying to all of them?
Yes, I will be brief. I want to thank, of course, all our experts for an excellent exchange. Regarding the questions, I would say there's two things that a new German government can and should do. First of all, they should refrain from pushing for the completion of the project politically, as the governments have done in the past. And I see an indication that this might happen because in the coalition contract, there will be a sentence saying that the issue should be decided on the basis of European law, which basically takes an agnostic position, not saying we want to push this regardless. It says it should be decided legally, fully implementing and applying European law. That's the one thing that they should do. And the second thing that they should do is clarify that they will insist, the government will insist that the German regulator will fully live up to the opinion that the Commission gives after the regulator proposes their take. And I would also want to see the German government pushing for an inclusive approach by the European Commission, not only listening to Gazprom, but also to member states and to countries like Ukraine, and also to civil society organizations like DUH. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Reinhard. And I thank you all our panelists, Agata, Łoskot-Strachota, Dr. Sasha Mueller-Kraenner, and Dr. Yuri Vitrenko for your presentations as well as for your replies. And I invite my great colleague as well, Michael Gahler, for concluding remarks. Michael.
Very, very quickly, because as we speak, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is already speaking in the European Parliament in the plenary. So we have noted there are political, legal, and environmental aspects that impact on this pipeline. Politically speaking, we see that Gazprom is a foreign policy instrument of the Kremlin in multifold ways. Actually, also when you look at Moldova, we have the situation that this whole pipeline was started in 2015, just a year after the aggression against Ukraine, where we have noted it is designed to bypass Ukraine and thereby weaken the country. That is the political aspects. Legally speaking, I think we are on a safe side insofar as the European amended gas directive will be fully applicable to the pipeline. That is the framework of the authorization and certification of the Bundesnetzagentur, and will also be the double check from the European Commission once it reaches them. Insofar, all current input into the procedure, also from Naftogaz and other stakeholders, is very much welcome. And I also think when we look at the environmental impact and also the strategy that is applied to step out of fossil fuels, and also with regard in the midterm on gas, we can see that when the German approach to end gas as a transitional energy source, when that is ending at the latest in 2040, we can foresee that if it were that this pipeline was getting into operation, it would only have a lifespan of 18 years. The other aspect, legally, I think we have to double check once again also the way the unbundling, any possible unbundling takes place, and really focus on the issues that Dr. Vitrenko referred to, and that is that it would require a complete new set of owners, and also opening it up for Central Asia in order to get them an access to the European market. So the monopoly function or the monopoly position of Gazprom would effectively have to be broken up and ended. And that would, of course, make it far less attractive for Gazprom and Russia to use this. So perhaps this covers all the aspects that have been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. And by this, we conclude our online debate. Thank you.
Thank you.
And have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.